Hi, everyone, and welcome to this special edition of our Coffee and Climate Conversations. I'm Elizabeth Hauptman, a volunteer coordinator with and field manager with Moms Clean Air Force, based here in Michigan. I'm so glad you're here joining us for this important and timely conversation. Too hot to play: youth, sports, and a changing climate. We'll explore how the rising temperatures and poor air quality are impacting school-age children, especially in sports and outdoors activities, and what parents, schools, and communities can do to keep us safe. Here's some Zoom housekeeping. Please stay on mute throughout the conversation until the question and answer period. If you'd like to share a question or a comment, feel free to drop it in the chat at any time. If we miss your question, don't worry. We'll reserve the last 20 to 25 minutes to the hour for an open discussion. So I'd like to introduce our three amazing women here, whom I know both personally and professionally. Please welcome Keisha Williams, a taxologist with the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy, also known as EAGLE. She brings her expert perspective on how extreme heat and air pollution affect children's health. She's been a key voice in helping schools and communities respond to climate-based related challenges in a practical and evidence-based way. Emily Pickett is a national editor and consultant with Moms Clean Air Force, a Florida-based mom with two energetic boys. She also works every day to lift up voices from around the country and families that are looking for cleaner and safer communities, especially when it comes to the health of our children and safety outdoors. And Lorna Perez is the Florida field organizer with Moms Clean Air Force. She is a longtime advocate in the Latinx community and formerly with Chispa, Florida. Lorna has worked at the intersection of public health, equity, and environmental justice for years. She is known for her deep community roots and powerful storytelling and commitment to making sure that all families are heard and protected. I just want to say personally again, thank you so much for all being here. I'd like to open this up with a question for all of you. We know it's getting hotter and that families are noticing the changes. To help ground this conversation, can each of you just share a moment of your story or shift that you've seen that really captures how extreme heat is already affecting kids in outdoor play? Keisha, would you go first, and then after that, Lorna, and then Emily?
My pleasure. Thank you again for this opportunity to participate in this conversation. So, one story that I thought about is pretty recent last month when I took one of my friend's kids to a local Juneteenth festival. Um, they had a really nice kids area, kind of bounce houses, water and bubble station, chalk, the whole nine. And as soon as the 6 year old that we were with saw all of the play options and all of the kids, it became very clear that she didn't care anything about how hot it was. And she was going to stay out there for as long as we would let her. Um, with that, the high for that day was 90 degrees, and that's not accounting for humidity or the heat index. And looking at sources like wonderground.com, that daily high was about 10 degrees higher than the historic average. While I'm not a parent, as a caregiver, it became very clear that I needed to be very watchful and very thoughtful about how to make sure she was safe related to heat stress. And so that was one of the first examples that I thought about.
Yeah, that reminds me of my nephew and his, uh, you know, 6 year old just going out to uh, just play till, So what I was thinking about is, Florida is number one in the country for heat related illnesses and emergency room visits. And, just a few years ago, there was an act passed called the Zachary Martin Act because a 16-year-old boy died of heat stroke during a summer high school football workout. And so the law requires that all football programs in the Florida High School Athletic Association have heat illness training and life-saving equipment. So that was a shift that happened, and that was just 4 years ago. And his mom was actually the one that pushed for the legislation after learning how extremely preventable his death could have been. And it feels like people are noticing the shift. They're noticing how much more careful we need to be when we're spending long periods of time outside in Florida and across the country, and to look for signs of, dehydration, heat exhaustion, heat stroke, which kids are more susceptible to.
And from my perspective, which, Lorna talking about football, we are a baseball family. My boys play baseball, my husband coaches. We are, at the fields all the time. And, I'm born and raised Floridian, and when it's hot, I know, like, I don't want to go outside. It's just too hot. I'm going to be in the pool or at the beach or, somehow wet. But when you're out watching and playing sports with kids, you don't have a choice. And these kids are really exposed, they're out there. And so, we take a lot of precautions when it comes to the kids playing, but which I'll probably get into later. But what really kind of awakened me to just how hot things are was we had a tournament and the fields were going to be turf fields, which that's a whole nother conversation about, I don't, about the toxins in the turf. But our coach said, the kids need special cleats to play on these turf fields because it gets so hot, it will melt their traditional cleats. And so, not only is that obviously, kind of scary that you've got to buy new cleats, but also these kids are sliding around, they can get burns. And so that was kind of like an eye opener to me about just how, heat is really just making sports more dangerous.
Yeah, thank you for sharing all those stories. And just as a quick, antidote to even what you all had said, my son Oscar, we had the wildfires that came through again this year in Michigan in the spring. And around that time, my son was outside and, he got pink cheeked. They were thinking about air quality issues, but once again, moreover, they were thinking about playing outdoors. It was like the last of, field days and, outdoor activities for these kids. And I feel like it isn't just a Florida thing. I think that's what you both are saying here. Keisha's even saying herself, is that it sounds like these protocols, the law that was passed in Florida, sounds like it's something that could be and should be, as our temperatures are rising, maybe something that should be mimicked in other states. Um, and so I really appreciate you, Lorna, bringing that up. And I'm going to bring my next question to you. And it has to do too with the Latinx community. I know that with my family, we love playing soccer and we love being outdoors. It's one of my son's favorite sports.
Yeah.
And how are you seeing like sports in general in your community? How's extreme heat impacting them?
Yeah, so a lot of Latinx families live in lower income neighborhoods or areas where it's even hotter because there's not much shade, or the AC systems are older, or they're not working well. So that makes the heat even tougher on kids playing sports outside. And on top of that, Latinx youth can face extra hurdles when it comes to even joining sports, like the cost, programs, not being culturally welcoming, or just not feeling included. So the ones who do get involved are often in teams or spaces that don't have the same resources or safety measures that other kids might have. And a lot of Latinx and immigrant communities or families depend on public or nonprofit sports programs since they're more affordable. But those programs usually don't have the same stuff as the better funded ones, like athletic trainers or shaded areas or access to indoor spaces. And there are groups in the Hispanic community that are pushing for things like mandatory water breaks and better protections from the heat, but it takes outreach. Like in Miami, there's a campaign called Que Calor, which means how hot, like directly translated. It's so hot. Que calor, que calor hace. And, as I remember being a kid and just wanting to participate in, in activities and having to translate for my parents and say, hey, this resource is available. If you're afraid of me being outside or whatever the concern is, let me translate this for you. So it adds an extra burden to the kids that even want to participate.
Yeah, that's very fair, and I appreciate you bringing, so those barriers to light. But I also appreciate the education and advocacy work that you're doing around that. I'm going
Mhm.
to move my next question to Keisha. Um, what is the most common heat-related health risk that you are seeing in children, and especially those involved in outdoors, school activities and sports?
Really appreciate that question. And I see that we've already covered a number of them with the examples that we've given. So, some of the most common health related or heat related health risks include dehydration associated with loss of electrolytes from sweating, also heat exhaustion or heat cramps. Um, with that, symptoms can include things like we already covered excessive sweating, but also elevated body temperature, dizziness, nausea, vomiting, possibly. And then those could lead to more severe and they can be more rare, but really extreme effects of heat stroke. And an example was given of various serious symptoms, but in addition to that, death can occur. So some of the serious symptoms would be things like seizures or brain damage. But actually knowing that, unfortunately, people have lost their lives because of extreme heat stress.
Yeah, it's not just isolated in Florida and in Michigan. And I'm sure, Emily, you get probably stories, and I'm sure from your national lens, you're gathering some of these things and hearing from families. What are you seeing or hearing about extreme heat and even extreme weather and heat? We could probably even include those together in youth sports and outdoor activities.
Yeah, thanks. I think something I've really noticed as I hear stories from across the country is, there are states like Florida that we're very accustomed to the heat. Like it has always been hot here. Um, Granted, it's getting hotter, definitely, but the stories from places, northern states or places with traditionally cooler climates that, they're not really fitted for, handling the extreme heat. They might not have central AC or, the buildings don't have the airflow. And I feel like these families, these communities are really feeling like the impacts at a possibly a greater level because it's completely new and they're not accustomed, they're not really as prepared to handle it the way that a state like Florida is. And so I think, we're hearing about kids on these hot playgrounds being affected, heat strokes in kids. But then, for those of us in the hot states, like our organizer PETA in Arizona, they're having to take additional precautions too because it's so hot. PETA just recorded a video about her experience attending an outdoor press conference that had to end at 9 a.m. because of heat. And so in her video, she went on to talk about all of the additional measures that she's taking to stay safe. Even like only going outdoors with her dog before the sun comes up because otherwise it's too hot, or running the water in her house for, an extended period just to get it to cool down. So really, I think we're just seeing lots of different impacts across the country. It's really, there are similarities with what we're all experiencing, but then there's also these like very diverse stories that are unique to just each community's situation.
And fair, and to that point, it was brought up earlier that sometimes even just having, the barrier of language, having things translated so folks can get the information or learn the signs from heat exhaustion or heat stroke. And knowing that it's a action alert day and making sure that we're checking so your asthmatic friends and family, COPD, those more sensitive folks have the protection. Um, and going back to you, Lorna, I just wanted to, you know, bringing up these challenges. What intersection in broader environmental justice issues do you see in the communities that you serve?
Very broad, very broad. It's all connected. We have to understand that there is a relationship between climate change and migration. The US historically is the biggest contributor to greenhouse gas emissions, and climate change impacts disproportionately affects the global south, which often lacks the resources and infrastructure to adapt to the changing climate. And people are leaving places like Mexico because of droughts and Honduras because of intense hurricanes. My family's from Puerto Rico, and we all know what happened during Hurricane Maria and how big of a migration that was. And Puerto Rico is still recovering from Hurricane Maria at 8 years later. Um, and so a lot of people are being forced to leave their homes because of climate change. And then they head here to the US, which has played a huge role in causing global warming in the first place. So now not only are they fleeing climate disasters back home, but they're also risking their lives crossing deserts, which are getting more hot and extreme, and more people are dying from severe dehydration trying to get here. And then we look at something like labor, industries in Florida that are heavily reliant on immigrant workers, like agriculture, construction, landscaping. They're extra vulnerable to extreme heat, due to outdoor work, increases direct exposure to the sun and heat, lack of heat protection policies. Florida has no regulations that mandate heat protection for outdoor workers, like guaranteed shade breaks, access to water, and heat safety training. We have socioeconomic factors. Many immigrant workers have low wages and limited access to healthcare, and it makes it harder to recover from heat-related illnesses. And for now, for undocumented workers, there's a fear of retaliation if they speak up, from their employers, fear of retaliation, of deportation. So, it's not easy to speak up and say, hey, it's time for my mandatory break. It's time for a necessary break because it's too hot out here, and, then we're looking at home ownership. Owning a home is one of the main ways to build generational wealth, but because of redlining, historic redlining, many Latino families have fewer opportunities to do that. And for those who do own homes, a big chunk are in high risk areas like flood zones or hurricane zones. So, for example, the Urban Institute just came out with a study this year that says that 27% of Latino home value is in high risk zones compared to 19% for all homeowners. And so that means when disasters like hurricanes hit, Latino homeowners tend to lose more. And on top of that, many Latino households in disaster prone areas don't have enough insurance, savings, or infrastructure support to really prepare for or bounce back from these kinds of events. So hurricanes hitting these communities the hardest.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that with us because, when you see on the news, you don't always get the full perspective. You don't always get the ground impact and how not only, like I said, that it impacts the whole state, but then even within the smaller communities. And then you're trying to find spaces that are going to be safe for your kids. And I know, Keisha, you work very hard at Eagle to work on supporting, schools and families to better prepare and respond to poor air quality and extreme heat days. Would you like to share a little bit about that work and how these families can be protected? Yeah.
Sure, I would love to. And it continues to build off of some of the examples that we've already given. So organizations like the Pediatric Environmental Health Specialty Unit have developed really helpful fact sheets and tips that as we gather this information, we try to share out. Things like, and we've already mentioned it, but continue to mention it, being watchful whether kiddos are going out there and, just being intentional about playing the hardest that they can. They're not thinking about necessarily um, um, heat stress and that sort of thing. So, we as coaches, as caregivers, as parents, for us to be really intentional and looking for those signs of heat stress. So dizziness, excessive sweating, that someone is showing signs of nausea or muscle cramps, that during high heat days, so approximately 90 degrees or hotter, but also really appreciating what's been said about when we're in colder climates. So myself being in Michigan, lower temperatures can really still feel hot, and sometimes we're not acclimated to those even temperatures in the high 80s. Thinking about that and maybe rescheduling practices or outside activities, or moving things to the shade where it's cooler, wearing lightweight clothing, and light colored clothing to stay cooler, making sure that we're using sunscreen and reapplying um, to prevent sunburn, just thinking about cumulative impacts and multiple things that might be factoring in. In addition to heat stress, there's a potential for sunburn. There's the potential, as you noted, especially with my work, for there to be a poor air quality day, for pollutants like ozone or dust in the air that we talk about, particulate matter, for that to be also contributing and making a bad situation worse. And so thinking about taking more breaks, thinking about drinking plenty of fluids, whether it's water or sports drinks or Pedialyte, to make sure that we're being safe.
Thank you. And thank you for providing that information for all of our audience today. If you have a chance, please check in the chat. We're populating it with all sorts of information for everyone today. Um, and thank you for leading me into my next question, which is for Emily. As a parent, what worries you most? And what kind of actions do you want schools and communities were taking more seriously?
Yeah, so Keisha kind of touched on this with, the kids not being aware of, especially the little ones. They're not going to realize that they're overheating. And so for me, the thing that worries me most is that, especially as we get to the older kids, when they're on their own, when they're on a team, when they're at camp, when they're at school, at PE. I worry that they're not going to advocate for themselves and for what they need. I think we are always telling our kids, like, hey, if you need a break, take the break. Go sit in the shade, go get some water. Like, even if the coach tells you that you need to get back out there, like, you need to take responsibility and be autonomy over yourself, and let them know, like, this is we can't joke with this. This is life or death. And so our kids need to feel empowered that they can say, I need a break. They need to have that confidence. And then on the flip side, like, these coaches and teachers, they need to be receptive. They need to be educated that this is a big deal. There was recently, I think just last week, there was a Memphis high school football player who went to the ICU over heat stroke. And from the news coverage that I read, it sounded like there are precautions, kind of like what Lorna spoke to in Florida. There are guidelines on how to handle summer activities, especially with football, because that's, you've got the padding and everything, and that can really make you hotter. And so, from what I understand, they were not abiding by their local regulations and protective measures. So, I think that, these policies need to be in place. They need to be abided by. I think PE teachers and coaches, they need to have required training on how to keep kids safe, and then what to do if, how to recognize the signs of heat stroke, and then what to do if a child is experiencing that. So I think, just what worries me is just that the kids don't have I want them to make sure they know they can say no to the activity. They don't need to tough it out, So
And it's good that parents nowadays are really talking about that more so. And you're right, we do need to give kids the bodily autonomy to say, I don't feel so good right now. I do need to take a break. I do need to get in the shade. I do need to get some water. And then, moreover, giving the parents tools as well to do that. And I think that advocacy, is the word that stuck with me with what you said. And we're all advocates here. Laura, I'm turning it back to you. And just speaking about advocates, what examples in community leadership would you want to share with parents and local leaders? I know you touched on a lot of stuff today, but how are moms and community advocates pushing for solutions? I know electric school buses is something we really are passionate about, reducing children's exposures to dirty air, especially when it comes to like heat. And how that amplifies like health risks. Can you talk about a little bit of your work with moms? And maybe we can pull some resources too as you're talking.
Was that for me, Elizabeth? I'm so sorry. Uh, so the word that stands out to me when talking about all of our advocacy is community. We can't do this alone. Sometimes we feel so alone. What can I do? What can one person do? But we can't do it by ourselves. And connecting with like-minded people, networking, people with common goals and values, and the education and visibility in both English and Spanish that Moms has in Florida is such a source of just inspiration and pride for me being a part of Moms. Reaching out to my community and, hey, we have a fact sheet in Spanish, to talk about electric school buses and explain why they are, so much better than dirty diesel buses, and what dirty diesel buses are doing to harm our kids. And, diesel buses are a big problem, especially for Latino kids. In Florida, more than 850,000 students ride diesel buses every day. That's almost a million. And that means they're breathing in harmful fumes that cause asthma, lung issues, headaches, and even problems with learning. And a lot of Latino families rely more on school buses. So our kids are getting hit the hardest by this pollution. And that's where Mom's Clean Air Force comes in. We're pushing to keep funding for electric school buses since they don't give off those harmful fumes. They're quieter and they help cut down on asthma attacks and missed school days. And like I said, some studies show that kids learn better when they're not exposed to that kind of pollution every day. And this is also about fairness. It's about justice. Latino communities are more likely to live in areas with bad air and fewer resources. So getting clean buses into these neighborhoods first helps fix some of that inequality. And Moms is out there being vocal about it. We're reaching out to our elected leaders and, having them join us. Let's have a press conference about this. Let's talk about why ESBs are so great, and we're reaching across party lines. It's a bipartisan. The health of our children is bipartisan. So, we're scheduling conversations where, online, emailing, we're doing public comment when we can go in person. We have a petition for cleaner energy in Florida that we're spreading around. And, with these rollbacks that are happening, we are, testifying at the EPA. And we're celebrating when a school district receives its funding, its grant funding, we're celebrating. We're making sure we're just loud about how happy we are, ribbon cutting ceremonies, social media. Yay, we have electric school buses now, and the kids can, ride in quieter buses. They, with the windows closed with air conditioning, they can hear each other. They can breathe clean air and get to school feeling just more refreshed.
As a former student athlete and somebody who has a student athlete, we spend a lot of time on buses. That is a really legit thing. And before my work with moms, I do talk about this myself. I remember going to and from games, and I lived in a rural area, so we were on the bus for like 45 minutes easily. And I would get headaches and nauseous. And I never put the two together that it was breathing in all those carcinogenic fumes. And in the bus, we've learned that it often holds more pollution than outside the bus. Um, and that is a equalizer, like you said. I think it's one of the best equalizers that we have is these grants. We're lucky here in Michigan. We have them at the state level as well as the federal level, so brag about us. But anyways, that said, I do think there are larger tools and then there's smaller tools. Keisha, I'm coming to you with this one because I know you work on some of these smaller things too. So, are there some low cost, high impact tools or strategies that you recommend to coaches or families, school staff that are dealing with these heat related issues?
Definitely. There's a list of free resources that I really wanted to highlight. Um, First, given what we talked about in terms of the importance of translation and having these basic facts available for multiple groups, there's a fact sheet set that came out of our health department, but they did translate it into the top four languages within our state. So English, Spanish, Arabic, and Bengali. And just want to share those as well. Hopefully that translates well. Oh, I'll have to share them individually, but I'll share those in a moment. And then in addition to those, there are a few more sets. Let's see. That, and then okay, I think that went through. There are a few more sets of, again, free tools that I think can be really helpful in terms of understanding what the temperatures are, understanding what the local air quality is, and then using that to protect oneself. And so with some of those, in addition to knowing kind of those real-time estimates for temperature and air quality, we can also get forecasts and predictions about what the air quality will be the following day. Of course, we're kind of used to this related to the weather and temperatures and knowing those forecasts, but it's really awesome that we can also have those tools for air quality. Sometimes it's as simple as an app on a phone. So I know with having an iPhone, the weather app also has information about air quality attached to it. In addition to that, there's the Air Quality Index, which is a program out of the United States Environmental Protection Agency that gives, again, real-time air monitoring data and air quality data. Perfect, exact, nice, nice real-time demo. I love that. The Air Quality Index, or sometimes you'll see it abbreviated AQI, it also gives those forecasts for air quality, and it also has health messaging to help people plan. And so with that, the system is color coded where green is good or better air quality. Yellow may be something for people to look out for, but orange and getting into red and maroon, those can be potentially hazardous for someone who is in a sensitive group, like an asthmatic, or to the point where we're getting to those darker red colors of maroon, where it's hazardous potentially for anyone that might be breathing that. And so depending on the air quality, there will be suggestions in terms of what someone can do to protect themselves. And that can be really helpful. Again, along with that, someone can sign up for alerts in terms of air quality, and that system is called EnviroFlash, and we'll share that information as well. And then with that, the federal government has also a very helpful mapping tool where it's based off of wildfire and the associated smoke. And it, again, helps people plan, helps people to know this may be poor air quality, it may be really impacted above and beyond the typical air quality. And so I may want to change what I'm doing today. I may need to change what I'm doing today. It's it's a really good, the mapping tool in terms of fire and smoke can be really helpful because although it's a national mapping tool, it also considers fires that may be occurring in Canada or Mexico. And so we know within Michigan here over the last week or so, we've been impacted, and that map as well as the air quality alerts have been really helpful for people to know how to plan and if needed to rearrange their schedules to protect their health and the health of their kiddos.
Thank you for that. And thank you for giving us all those resources. As a parent of an asthmatic child, I use many of those as I was showing in real time, as you were talking about. But once again, there was something I read not too long ago when we start getting in those red zones, for every hour you were outside is the equivalent of smoking a cigarette. And I don't know anyone who wants to hand their child a cigarette. That seems like a no-brainer to me that we should be protecting our kids from these very at-risk situations. But I know that, with tools are great, for parents to have, but we also need to have the advocacy portion of what we do here. And I know all of us are very passionate about it. Emily, because you do a lot with communications, and I know this is something you work on for moms and helping amplify these stories, do you have any campaigns that our volunteers can get involved with? Any petitions that you can, that we were talking about? I know we talked a little bit about what moms did last week with but I'm going to let you talk a little bit about that.
Sure. I mean, there's so many different ways to get involved with moms and, advocate. Like the petitions are just, one easy way. It takes just 30 seconds, to sign a petition. But yeah, last week we were so busy with all of our testimonies. Before EPA talking about, safe mercury and air toxics protections, power plants regulations. And so, yeah, this is such an easy way for people to tell their own personal stories about why we need to be protected. And I think a lot of people might be intimidated that, testifying before EPA, that sounds like something scary, something that, oh, should I? I don't know. But I remember it was like my first week at Mom's. I hadn't even really done much Mom's work. And there was a testimony opportunity a couple of years ago. And I was like, should I do this? And Liz was like, definitely, if you want to. And so, you put your story together, which it's always easy to, to put two and two together, the impacts of your own pollution or climate change story, and then, call in and read it to the audience. And so, yeah, that's a great way to get involved as well. And, I do a lot on social media, and so much conversation, probably the majority of our conversations are virtual these days and happening on different social platforms. And so, I think that's also a great way to connect. Like we've got all of our state accounts, like Lorna's and like yours in Michigan, and reaching out and engaging with different people within your communities too. Just making those connections and finding like-minded people who you can work together with and bounce ideas off of. Are also great ways to get involved, share, build community and connection.
And thank you for all of that and gathering those stories. And there are so many resources. If you haven't been to our Moms Clean Air Force website in a while, I promise you, every day there is something new. Every day there's an opportunity to engage, whether it be in your state or with the EPA. And I love that this was a term that hooked me all those 12 years ago, was they called it nap time activism. And I love that. We can spend 15 minutes to learn about a particular topic or download a fact sheet. And we can take that into our community, and it builds community. And I'm also really excited to share too, and I'm so glad you brought it up, Emily, is that we're going to be starting a training program here for super moms. And we are going to have these programs where you're going to join me and Sam for an hour, and we're going to do a how-to engage with EPA, how to write testimony, and tell your story. So please visit our calendar and check those dates out. We will have that up very soon. But this is my favorite part. It's when I get to turn it over to our audience. If anyone has a question, please feel free to drop it in the chat or raise your hand. I'm going to ask Sam and Soler if they could help me